How's it going, y'all? Scott here. I hope you're doing well today. In this video, I am going to break down some of the things that went into making my film about mountain biking in Iceland. I didn't have any actual BTS shooting happening while on the project because we were a small crew, really tight budget. But I wanted to talk about the pre-production process and some of the things that went into making the film happen and what happens when things don't go as planned, because things definitely did not go as planned for this project. If you haven't seen the film yet, the link to it is in the description below. It is a little bit of a longer piece, so be prepared, get some popcorn before you dive into that. When I set out to work on this, Mark Matthews, the mountain biker that I'm often doing projects with, had a bit of budget left over with one of his sponsors, and we were trying to figure out, what could we do with this money? What would be a fun project that we'd both be excited about? And he had been to Iceland a few times in the past, and in one of those trips, he made a film that received some negative comments from Icelanders because it showed him riding through some pristine, mossy areas in the country that didn't have a trail established. And people were really up in arms because this actually impacts their ability to gain new trails and actually can get them banned from certain parts of the country. Now, Mark was given permission to ride in the area that he was in. It was on private land. They were building a new trail there. So everything he did was above board, but you couldn't see that in the film itself. So he wanted to go back to Iceland and really get a better understanding of the struggles that they're facing as trail builders, as mountain bikers, and try to educate himself as well as make a piece that would educate others that are traveling to Iceland or other countries. As we discussed how we could present this story, he was explaining this place called the Bike Farm, and they have been a sheep farm for hundreds of years, and now they've been converting their sheep trails into bike trails. And so it's an interesting way for the country to get new mountain bike trails without actually causing any ecological impact there. So we reached out to them to see if they would be interested in being involved in the film, and they were on board with the idea, which was great for us. We had a story, we had some characters, it felt like it had some depth to it. In addition to the bike farm letting us tell their story, they were also going to provide us with a vehicle and transportation as well as guiding around Iceland, since they were super experienced with that. And they'd also provide accommodations while on the farm. So this all made the budget for the project work a whole lot better. Now, with all that squared away, I started to think about what gear I was gonna bring on the trip, and I really went with my pretty standard kit. I was shooting with the Canon C70 as my main A cam, and then I brought a Canon R6 as a backup B camera, but primarily ended up using it to shoot time lapses. I brought the RF 15 to 35, the EF 70 to 200, and then an EF Tokina 11 to 16. In addition to that, I had the Deity S Mic 2S as my main on-camera shotgun mic, Sennheiser G4 wireless lav, which I used primarily during my interviews. And then I also had the Lark 150 from Hollyland, which is a dual lav system. I of course had a drone with me. You can't go to Iceland without a drone. And I brought the OmniCharge Ultimate as well, which is a portable battery bank that you can fly with. And that was super clutch to get through some of the longer stints when we were remote. We needed to keep all of our cameras up and running. And so we were balancing using that and charging off of the truck battery, which we only killed one time during the trip, but we never ran out of batteries and we were never stranded anywhere. Everything was packed into my Shimoda Action X70, which had my camera and all the essential lenses, as well as all of my batteries, which went into the carry-on for the plane. And then my checked luggage included my drone, a handful of other, charging accessories and things like that. And that went into a Pelican 1510. Now, going into the trip, I had planned to bring a lighting setup, light stands, a boom mic, and I was encouraged by others that this is probably not a good idea, and I'm really glad that I slimmed down my kit to just what I really needed. We had a small vehicle for most of the transport we were doing, as well as traveling in airports, and just extra gear makes things move that much slower. I ended up using everything that I brought with me and didn't feel extremely limited by not having the light. I wouldn't have even been able to set them up in a lot of places because we were remote, there was no power, or it was super, super windy, and we wouldn't have been able to actually stand these things up without them blowing over in the wind. The only piece of kit I wish I would have had on this trip is the RF 24-70. Now, I didn't own that at the time, and I was having to switch between the 15-35 and 70-200 a lot to get the shots that I needed, and this really slowed things down on those run and gun days where you're following the action around and you just need a lens with a lot of versatility in it. And I picked that lens up when I got back from this trip, and it hardly leaves my camera. It's what I'm shooting with right now. Can't recommend that lens enough if you're doing documentary work. Get a 24-70, it will save you. In addition to figuring out the gear that I was bringing, I started to develop a little bit of the story that I wanted to tell as much as I could remotely. I had a few conversations with the folks from the bike farm, looked at their website a fair bit, and watched every video I could find about their operation to start getting a picture of what their story was. But a week before leaving, we had some trip-altering news that the bike farm was no longer going to be able to participate due to personal reasons. And this sent us into a bit of a frenzy trying to figure out what we should do. We had a handful of discussions of should we cancel the trip completely. We decided that Mark had enough connections in the country from his previous trips there that we could likely find an interesting story that would showcase what's going on with mountain biking in the country around these issues of trail building and access for riders. And one of the key people he connected with was Magna, who you will meet in the film. He's a core piece of the mountain biking community in Iceland and is really well connected with all of the different regions of the country. Magna was supportive of our idea, wants to see the mountain bike scene be pushed forward in his country, and as a result gave us access to people that we may have never been able to meet, as well as vouched for our story and encouraged them to speak with us. So can't overstate how essential having that kind of person willing to support your project is when you're going to another place where you don't really know that many people. Because I needed to take a bit more of a journalistic approach to the film versus creating a character piece about the bike farm, I wanted to talk to as many people as possible and get a lot of different perspectives on the scene so that I could put together a final film that broadly showcased what Iceland was about and what struggles they were facing. Now, I knew this was probably not going to be as engaging of a film as a character piece, but given the circumstances, I felt like that was the best solution. When we first got to Iceland, we went straight to Ice Bike to connect with Magna. And in addition to meeting with him, we met some of his guides that work there. And they really made the trip for us. They came into the Iceland Highlands with us and basically acted as our guides. They were super knowledgeable of the region and the trails that were there. But they also opened up about their story within mountain biking. They've grown up with mountain biking as something that is existing in their country, but they are still needing to push it to the next level. And so they had a perfect perspective to help shape how this story was told, and they were just rad people to hang out with. Looking back, as I was editing this project, I wish I would have spent more time with them and potentially even shifted the focus of the film to be completely about those folks, because they had interesting stories, they were fun to hang out with, they became fast friends with us. And I think a big lesson that I learned is don't let those moments pass you by. I was unsure what else we would see. This was the beginning of the trip. I didn't know who else we would meet, and I didn't want to focus too much on the first people that we connected with in the country. But by the end of the trip, I could see that I actually could have created a character-driven piece versus a journalistic piece if I would have stayed with them for more time and really dug into their experiences there. But super grateful for the time that we did have with them, and glad that that was the first step into Iceland mountain biking that I experienced, because it just shaped how I looked at the need to respect the environment and the need to stay on trails in the country, because they were worried about losing access to some of the only areas that they can ride. And that really galvanized how important it is to them that particularly foreigners understand this thing and don't go there and cause impacts that would prevent them from riding bikes in their own country. So all this goes to say that doing planning and pre-production is an important step of the process, but sometimes you just have to connect with somebody in the place that you're going and have them link you up with the people that they think are going to be the most interesting people to tell their story. And you have to be able to roll with those punches and just keep the camera rolling. Don't turn the camera off. Get as much footage as you can. By the end of this trip, I think I had about 20 hours of footage, including all of my interviews. And I was really thankful that I had all of that in post-production to craft the story in a way that worked best for what we needed to share. With that, I want to shift gears into the post-production for this project. Before I do that, I want to talk a bit about the sponsor of this video, MusicBed, because they tie in really closely to how I work in post. When I'm doing a film, I'm always trying to make a viewer have an emotional reaction to what I'm putting together. And particularly with this project, I didn't have a character whose story you really connected with for the entire time. And so I needed to rely on music to help the viewer understand the story and the feeling that I wanted them to experience. And with MusicBed, I'm really confident that I can always find high quality stuff that's gonna help me do this, whether I need to have some intrigue or some sadness or hope, depending on the part of the film that I'm trying to build. And what I'll generally do is I'll make a playlist with the songs that I think might fit. I'll just scan through a bunch of different tracks, and then I'll start auditioning them with my rough edits, and it will help shape the way that edit's going, and generally I will just instantly know. You'll be like, this is the song that fits this piece. I have put together a playlist that includes some of the music from the Iceland film as well as other songs that I think help drive an emotional impact in your audience. So hear the difference for yourself and sign up for a free account with MusicBed. If you use my coupon code ScottBell at checkout, you will receive 1 month for free if you purchase an annual subscription. Thank you to MusicBed for sponsoring this video. Let's get into post-production. When I was shooting this film, I knew I was going to make something that was a little bit less YouTube-y, for lack of a better term. I wanted the shots to be slower paced. I knew the film would be longer. It was just going to be something a bit different than what I had made in the past because I wanted to challenge myself in that way, and I thought it also helped showcase the beauty of the country. Iceland has so many dramatic landscapes that I wanted to show with slow-moving drone shots or static shots that just let the viewer take the experience in. It was particularly convenient that as I was building out the story, I was able to follow things in a chronological order. Going to Ice Bike first, where some of the struggles for access are very real, and from there we're moving up into some of the northern parts of the country where there is more acceptance of mountain biking and some trail development is starting to happen. And then finally, the last community we ended up in is a very established mountain bike scene. And it felt like a natural progression in the way I wanted to tell this story. So it goes from a place of feeling uncertain to a place of hope and actual solutions that have happened for other Icelanders. I wanted that story arc to be what the viewer took away from the film. Now, as I mentioned, the biggest challenge I was going to have with this film is not having a main character whose story I was exploring. I had Mark, who was our connection to the issues going on there, but I wasn't directly following him the entire time because I didn't feel like it was his story to tell. I used Mark's story to build the tension at the beginning of the film because I wanted to have some emotional buy-in as early as possible and wanted people to be a little bit on edge of like, is there a solution to this problem, or is this something that isn't solvable? One of my favorite segments in the film is where you are just watching these scenes unfold with no dialogue, just this moody ambient music, and you just get to sit with what you've learned in the first part of the film while you take in these beautiful shots. I did really want to have a section that was just for the people that love shreddy mountain bike shots, and that was in the middle of the film. It was probably the easiest part of the trip because I could just find ways to make mountain biking and the landscape look cool. I didn't have to think about how was I gonna piece this story together? How is this all gonna work? I just got to shoot biking. It was just in the most beautiful part of the country where we hiked up to this big mossy spire and then Mark works his way down. Just kind of sits in the middle to give you a little bump of energy. You've watched this beginning of the story. Now here's a little bit of action and adrenaline to get you excited to carry you through to the second half of the film. And so those were intentional decisions to keep the viewer engaged in that way. My biggest lesson from this project is that while pre-production is helpful, it is not everything. Sometimes you have to be nimble and think on your feet. Plans change last minute and you still need to come home with enough footage to be able to put together your film. So keep the camera rolling, connect with people in the community that are well connected to others, and find the thread of your story, and you'll go home with enough content to make something that's still really great. So with that, I hope this was interesting, getting a little look behind the curtain of what went sideways on the Iceland film. I hope you enjoy watching the film if you have not yet watched it. Thank you so much for watching this video, and I will see you all in the next one.